Welcome to this episode of John's Journal, and we are going to continue to dig into what's going on with Nicholas Cresswell, do a little bit of a comparison, do a little bit of reading here. And I'm going to be going a little bit slower through this particular section of the journal than I normally would. A lot of journals you can speed through. You know, it's like, okay, I get the idea. Next. And then you'll get to a really, really important section, you know, for maybe, 2 weeks of their life or something. And it's like, okay, wait a minute, let's pore over this section over and over again. And here we are at one of these sections in Nicholas Cresswell's journal as he travels into the backcountry. We do not have lots and lots of detailed stories about what it's like when you go into the backcountry. We don't necessarily have as detailed a wonderful story about what it's like to travel in the cities of the colonies necessarily, but in this particular instance, these are kind of rare writings that we want to dig in to and take our time with. And I'll be, skipping over some of the most boring parts, but, here we go. We have traveled from down the Youghiogheny and then Monongahela, and now we've moved into the Ohio River. Tuesday, May 2nd, 1775. Proceeded down the river. Our canoes are so heavily loaded that we are in great danger of oversetting. The water is within 3 inches of the gunwale, which adds to the exceeding crankness of our vessel and makes me uneasy. Called at Fort Pitt and bought some necessaries such as lead, flint, and some silver trinkets to barter with the Indians. 2 quick kind of glossary things. The gunwales, that's the top edge of the boat here, as you're right there along. If you're in a canoe, it's that top edge on the side there. And then crankness. And in a sailboat, crankness is how quickly the ship tips over when a gust of wind hits it. So if a light gust of wind comes on to blow and the ship just leans right over, then it's said to be very, very crank. If the wind blows hard and the ship stays pretty upright, then it's stiff. It's a stiff sailor. You want it to stay fairly upright. The more that ship tips over, the more the wind blows across the sail and you don't get the speed. In this case, there's not a sail, but he's talking about how tippy our canoe is because it's so heavily loaded that it's very unstable. So depending on the design of your dugout canoe, that can be a real issue. And obviously it was for them. May 3rd, the next day. A little before dark, we stopped at a farmer's house to bake bread, agreed to lash our vessels together and float all night. The river is very high and rapid. Suppose we can float 2 miles in an hour. So still upon the Ohio, they're so far up on the Ohio that there's still the occasional house to stop at. There's still civilization, or as he would say, inhabitants. There are inhabitants. And so they stop at a house to bake bread, which I think is pretty darn neat. They're not bringing along already baked bread. We find out later on that they're bringing flour, but they have someplace to stop and bake bread. They're lashing their vessels together just right side by side to make them slightly more stable. Excuse me. And they decide they're going to float all night, which can be dangerous. You don't know what's coming down the river. And you're going to be navigating in the dark, and some people are going to be sleeping and some people awake probably. And they're just kind of going to float along with the current. So I mean, you still got to keep forward just enough so that you have steerage way. If you're floating exactly with the river, you can't steer, you can't get away from things. You might be sideways or backwards just when the time is you need to, go around a rock or come off the side of the river. So you still got work to do, but you have to do it in the dark. Okay. May 4th, the next day, in the morning, found ourselves opposite Yellow Creek on the west. Very heavy rain for several hours. Very few inhabitants, not a house to be seen in 40 miles. Though the land is exceeding rich in general, the river is exceedingly crooked, full of small islands and rapid. If there is high land on one side, there's always a rich, level bottom on the opposite shore. Got to Wheeling Creek, Fort Fincastle on the east side of the river. This is a quadrangular picketed fort on a little hill beside the river, built last summer by Lord Dunmore. A small garrison is in it. Here we took into our company Captain George Clark. Lashed our canoes together, drifted all night, stopped at Grave Creek about 2 a.m. So it's interesting. It's like a small world that Nicholas Cresswell, travels in. And in reality, the colonies are a small world. So the people that are famous in the colonies, it's not that rare for other people to run into them and talk to them. Nicholas Cresswell runs into and talks to famous people. And here he's running into George Rogers Clark. It's just like, what? So here's George Rogers Clark comes into their company. Okay, I'll float along with you guys, no problem. Friday, May 5th, got up very early and went to view the grave. So remember, they stopped at Grave Creek. It bears east of the river, about a mile from it and above the mouth of the creek. The great grave is a round hill, something like a sugar loaf, about 300 feet in circumference at the top, 100 feet high and about 60 feet in diameter at the top, where it forms a sort of irregular basin. It has several large trees upon it, but I could not find any sign of brick or stone upon it. It seems to have been a trench about it. There is 2 other hills about 50 yards from this, but not much larger than a charcoal pit, and much in that shape, with other antique vestiges. Some appear to have been works of defense, but very irregular. So we have a large mound. We know that there are other ancient civilizations here in North America, and we still don't know about them. And they were intrigued in the 18th century. There's a certain quantity of people like Thomas Jefferson that were very intrigued by some of those the vestiges of what was left over of some of those early civilizations. And this is one of those. The mound builders are building these very interesting large earthworks in North America, especially in that Ohio River Valley area. And here we have one that's huge, a huge 300 foot, 100 foot at the top, basin, these extra hills. And he said charcoal pit, he means smaller, very, very vertical, triangular sort of pit. So he means basically a charcoal lay where they would stack up sticks and then they would stack dirt upon them and make these little mounds. Maybe, it depends. I don't know the type that were normally used in his area that he's referring to, but they might be as much as 20 feet high, more likely 12 feet high, maybe 30 feet around. Very, very little conical hills, but something that you could tell was man-made, just like this original mound that he's saying is, great, big, and huge. Yeah, it's obviously man-made. It's got a trench around it. Something. Is it a fortification? Is it religious? We don't know, right? And he's describing it to us. Very interesting that they decide, let's go sightseeing. Got nothing better to do. He's intrigued by that. May 5th, this is the same day, all these hills appear to have been made by human art, but by whom and in what age and for what use I leave it to more able antiquarians to determine. And still intriguing to this day. Next day, May 6th, found ourselves opposite Muddy Creek. The heavy rain obliged us to take shelter in a lone house and stay all night. There are still some habitations as they're going down the river. A lone house. So maybe they've been traveling 50 miles and there's a house. And lucky for them, because it's raining like crazy, and they take shelter in this house. He doesn't describe it beyond that. Isn't that interesting? This morning, Captain Clark, this is the next day, who I find an intelligent man, shows me a root that the Indians call pucun, good for the bite of a rattlesnake. The root is to be mashed and applied to the wound, and a decoction made of the leaves, which is the patient's drink. The roots are exceedingly red. The Indians use it to paint themselves with, sometimes. Left Muddy Creek, past 2 small islands, to the Big Tree Island, so called from a number of large trees upon it. Went ashore on Big Tree Island and measured a large sycamore tree that was 51 feet 4 inches in circumference, 1 foot from the ground. So 51 feet in circumference, divide by 3, generally pi, something like that. And what we're going to get is like 17 feet across in diameter. It says 46 feet in circumference, 5 feet above the ground, and I suppose it would be measured that 20 feet high. So it's 46 feet in diameter, 20 feet up. There are several large trees, but I believe that these exceed the rest. One of the company caught a large catfish, which made a most delicious pot of soup. Passed Muskingum River on the west, fine land between that and Little Muskingum. Passed the Little Kanhawa River on the east, barren land about the mouth of it. Stopped to cook our supper at Fort Gower, a little picketed fort built last summer, but now deserted, at the mouth of Huckskin. On the west side, drifted all night. And I'm going to stop there for this little round. And I thought I would just touch on the idea of the people that they're running into, and earlier he talks about all the rascals in the area of Fort Pitt, and how he feels about the people. And he's talking about them like they are a subspecies of human, right? They're rascals. They're criminals, or they're on the outside edge of civilization. And too true that people who go into these kinds of situations, they are the kind of people who can survive in, let's say, a different civilization that he's normally used to. They have to be civilized in a different sort of way. It is the Wild West, truly. For them, it's out west, and it is wild. It's the Wild West of 1775. As contrast and compare, let's talk a little bit about the journal, another journal, and that is of Charles Woodmason. And he's traveling and working in the backcountry of the Carolinas, again, the Wild West, a slightly bit earlier. He's in the 1760s, I believe, mid to late 1760s, 1768. And he's a very, very similar situation in that he's from this very, English. He's from England, and he's an Anglican clergyman, and he's trying to work sort of his mission field, right, as it were, are these wild and crazy people living in the Wild West of South Carolina. And here we have Nicholas Cresswell, and he's talking about his canoe, and it's dangerous, and it's tippy, and he's dealing with the rain, and he's dressed for it. He's expecting it. He's on an adventure. And Charles Woodmason is having a similar kind of experience on an adventure. This is 1768, and he's been here a little while. I'm not sure when this starts, but he's been here at least a year and a half, maybe. Yeah, it starts in the middle of 1766, but this is January of 1768. So this is not a brand new experience for him. And let me see where I want to start here. I preached at Granny Quarter Creek to a mixed multitude of people from various quarters, but no bringing of this tribe into any order. They're the lowest pack of wretches my eyes ever saw, or that I have met with in these woods, as wild as the very deer. No making of them sit still during the service, but they will be in and out, forward and backward the whole time, women especially, as bees to and fro to their hives. All this must be borne with at the beginning of things, nor can be mended till churches are built, and the country reduced to some form. How would the polite people of London stare and see the females, many very pretty, come to service in their shifts and short petticoats only, barefooted and bare-legged, without caps or handkerchiefs, dressed only in their hair, quite in a state of nature, for nakedness is counted as nothing, as they sleep all together in common in one room, and shift and dress openly without ceremony. The men appear in frocks or shirts and long trousers, no shoes or stockings. But I should remember that I am talking of myself and of religious matters, not of customs of the country. So he reproaches himself for sort of, bothering to sit there and tell us about the inhabitants. Now, he might be exaggerating some here because of who he is, but probably isn't exaggerating that much. At least we can tell that they're very, very different customs when we get into the backcountry. So that's in January. We are still in January. And let me skip down to the 17th. Excuse me. The 17th. Wind, rain, cold, frost, storm alternately. No going any journeys. The rivers and creeks being swelled in the country all underwater. So officiated this day at Pine Tree Hill. So someplace rather close. Next week, the 24th, went up to Rocky Mount, but got exceedingly wet by swimming the creeks. Can you imagine? I contracted a very great cold and cough, from whence I crossed the country and gave a sermon to Granny's Quarter the 28th, and so down to Pine Tree, 33 miles, 36 miles. The next February 7th. At Pine Tree, the 14th, Granny's Quarter, not being able for the floods to go further, and 'twas with hazard of my life and with great pains and difficulty that I got over this creek. Traveled 36 miles. 17th, being Ash Wednesday, I officiated and gave the sermon, but had a very small congregation. Could not get the church people to attend. On the 21st, got over the creeks by riding 30 miles about and heading them. Reached my congregation on Little Lynch's Creek, over which I was obliged to swim. Water and weather very cold. This gave me a severe sore throat. Charles Woodmason is swimming across these creeks in January. Swollen, high water. Who knows what's going on there? Multiple times. Now, maybe when he says swimming, he's making his horse swim across the water, but I don't think so. I think that he is getting out. And I think there's other references where he talks about, taking off certain things. How do you swim with? Here he is preaching. He's probably got books, Bibles, paperwork with him, and he has to figure out how to, carry those across. Who knows? Maybe he has like a wooden bowl or something he puts things in. I don't know. It's an amazing story that he would cross these rivers. There are no bridges, he says, there are no bridges in this country, so he's traveling. Just recently I did that video about how, the waterways are the ways to travel, and they make it easy to travel in one way and impossible to travel by land because you have to cross over them. There are very few ferries or bridges. Amazing. It's just so hard for us to grasp what it was like to have to travel, to do travel, what the crazy adventures were like for these people as they go into these backcountry situations. Not only dealing with nature, the rivers and the woods, but dealing with hostile people, possibly Native Americans. Sometimes not Native Americans, but just hostile other people, like European descent, right? There's many times Charles Woodmason has difficulty with the people he's working with. Some are welcome him in, and other ones, want to run him out on a rail. And Nicholas Cresswell, again, runs into rascals and, people that he doesn't trust. In fact, this next part, as we go into the next part of Nicholas Cresswell, the fun and games are over, and now it gets more difficult. Now he runs into the people part of the difficulties of the journey. Thanks for coming along on this adventure as we dig into the journals of the 18th century, and specifically for North America. Thank you for being part of Townsends Plus and your amazing support. I hope you have a wonderful day. Thanks for watching.